So let's be honest, if you try to give rock and roll another name, say, you just may call it Chuck Berry, right? That's what fellow legend John Lennon had said of one of his idols. Berry died yesterday at 90 years old. He was found unresponsive at his home outside St. Louis.
Berry is hailed as the father of rock and roll, man who made rolling guitar solos and songs about cars, women's the hallmark of what would eventually become the new sound of rock and roll. Watch him on stage in the 1950s and you see the beginnings of everything that was to come. Historian Douglas Brinkley was friends with Chuck Berry. That was a revelation to all of us. He has helped teach
a national monument of some kind. He's just so important to our culture. Back in 1992, I had an on-road class I did at Hofstra University called the Magic Bus. And students would live on my bus for the semester. And I ended up in a newspaper article. I wrote an article about Chuck Berry being a poet. And it got to him, my article, and he loved it because he always thought of himself as a poet. And his lyrics that sometimes we take for granted are very intricate, like Brown-Eyed Handsome Man has lyrics in it that are decisively about attacking the Jim Crow racism in the South. But at any rate, he said when you come to St. Louis, all your students can be hosted by Chuck Berry. So we would visit with him and his daughter Ingrid at Blueberry Hill restaurant, and we would dine with him and talk with him, answer questions. He'd sign his book. Then he'd let some of my students interact with him in the basement on instruments and talk about the whole history of rock and roll. This sort of thing, due to my friend Joe Edwards in St. Louis, we kept doing it. And so just this past year, just a few months ago, Chuck Berry and his wife reached out to me to write the liner notes for what will be his last CD. He recorded an album called Chuck, which will be coming out very soon. And here's a man recorded these songs in his late 80s, and these are mostly original compositions. And a couple of them that, when people hear them in a few weeks, their minds are going to be blown that somebody in his 80s can play rock and roll with such fierce passion.
What can you tell us about him, perhaps, Doug, since you did have that sort of relationship with him, that maybe we would never know about him?
That there were two people. There's Charles Berry and there's Chuck Berry. And Charles was a Southern squire, country gentleman, so kind, warm, and polite. And that's who I got to know. But there's also Chuck. And Chuck Berry is somebody that when it got ripped off by so many bogus managers and promoters that he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And so if he felt that you were trying to hustle him, he could turn on you. He knew how to protect his own turf, if you'd like. But the person I knew was somebody who loved St. Louis more than anybody you would ever meet. And he could have lived anywhere in the world. He stayed there in St. Louis. He loved the Mississippi River. He loved St. Louis Cardinals. He would regularly go down to this bar, Blueberry Hill on Delmar Avenue, and play whenever he felt like it. And he just was a blowtorch of a man. He had great physical stamina to the very end and was smart as a whip.
You know, I covered when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in New York in 1986. The Hall of Fame's, of course, in Cleveland. I spent time with him in a broadcast truck. He was extremely down to earth. There was never any hint of celebrity around him. He was just a regular guy and a great guy to talk to. Did he ever tell you what his favorite song was?
Never told me his favorite song, although the song Promised Land, I know, was close to him. You know, talk about down to earth. So he invited me into a recording studio with him a few years ago. There's nobody there. It was in the outskirts of St. Louis, and I was there with his sound engineer and himself. And then we hopped in his little Toyota, and we just drove to a Wendy's and just had a Frosty Fries, the whole bit. But he would sit there, he would wear a captain's hat, like a sailor's cap. And I asked him about that that afternoon, and he said, I don't wear baseball caps. Chuck Berry's not a hip-hop salesman. But he would sit there, and everybody would come up and ask for an autograph, and he just, not only did he give them an autograph on a menu or a piece of paper, he'd draw a smiley face next to it. He never needed anything luxurious or posh. I'm afraid the real biography of Chuck Berry, our country treated him very badly when he became a big hit in the late 1950s and then early 60s. He got entangled with the law and a few things, and some of these were of the, racist sort of encounters he had with police who thought that Chuck Berry was pushing the cultural noise level in America too high. But he was a homespun guy, just like you said.
Yeah, his influence on other rockers who were to come is just hard to even fathom. So many of the next generation of rock and roll were influenced by Chuck Berry.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, Doug, thank you very much for joining us, remembering back, and looking at the life of Chuck Berry.
We appreciate it, Doug. Thank you.
Okay.
And we're so sorry for your loss, really, at the end of the day. I mean, it's got to hit him. All right, still to come, the #2 guy at the NSA weighing in on President Trump's wiretapping claims, calling them nonsense. We delve deeper into how this all started, what the implications are now for the future of international relations.
Plus, Northwestern may have lost in the NCAA tournament, but one